Where to start with boons? They seem so random at first, but there is a strategy to them that is the key to having successful runs in Hades. This is a beginner's guide to that effect, which will help you progress in the game faster and hopefully increase your enjoyment as you escape the House of Hades. First, let's talk about the system in general. Now here's the basic info. Each of your attacks, and by that I mean your basic attack, special, cast, dash, and call, or A, B, X, Y, and R depending upon your controller mapping, can only each have a single boon attached to them directly. If, for example, you take a dash boon from Zeus, then you cannot also take a dash boon from Poseidon without having the second remove the first. This is why occasionally you see a message that says this will replace X if you take a specific boon from a keepsake. Beyond that though, you can stack any number of passive boons that will synergize with the statuses and effects that you get from these primary boons. Once you have a basic Tier 1 boon, you have the chance of picking up a Tier 2 boon from subsequent keepsakes from the same gods. And after that, depending upon which Tier 1 and Tier 2 you picked up, you can be offered a legendary boon. Now, not all legendaries are created equal, but most do offer a significant advantage when used on the right build. Today, we're only covering keepsake boons that you get from gods you encounter with a relatively new save file, and that you've died at least once, but you haven't beaten the game yet. And we also won't be talking about chaos. First, an important note, your best overall build will come with boons from a combination of gods. In fact, there are lots of specific dual boons that we're not going to be talking about in this video, as that goes way beyond the basics. What I'm covering today is just a look at each individual god's offerings and how to think of them in the context of your build. A top 6 recommended builds video is definitely in the works, but this is just the beginner's guide. First up on the list is Ares. I'm starting with Ares as, well, what you would expect from the god of war. He can get you a crazy amount of DPS. I'd recommend going after a Doom build for Ares. Doom is a status effect that's very powerful. After an enemy gets the Doom status effect, they'll take a massive amount of damage in a single shot about a second later. Usually this damage does more damage than the direct damage from the attack, and it can stack. And after you get your first Doom boon, you can look to pick up Dire Misfortune, which allows Doom to deal more damage on subsequent hits before the Doom activates, or you could pick up Impending Doom, which, while adding a delay before Doom does damage, significantly increases the amount of damage from Doom. Now, unlike other status effects that we're going to see with almost every other god, Ares' Doom status effect can only be applied to either your attack or your special. Your cast, dash, and call abilities instead transform into a Blade Rift, which has the potential to also be a very potent attack in their own right. Blade Rifts are slow-moving area damage vortices, for lack of a better word. As a Tier 1, they're just okay, but they start to shine when you pick up Tier 2 Blade Rift boons. I'd recommend Engulfing Vortex, which makes the Blade Rift last longer and pulls enemies into the Blade Rift. Especially since once you do, you have the potential to pick up Ares' legendary boon Vicious Cycle, which adds bonus damage for each consecutive hit of the Blade Rift, turning your vortex into spinning blades of death. For a nice weapon pairing, I'd pick up Ares when you have the bow or the shield, and apply the Doom to your special. This opens up any number of boons from other gods to improve your special and deal massive amounts of DPS to swarms of enemies and to bosses. Up next is Zeus, who's another god who can help do a massive amount of damage and is particularly effective when facing swarms of enemies. Zeus's lightning damage allows attacks to jump from one enemy to another, dealing a chain of damage along the way. This Tier 1 lightning damage can be applied to any of your attacks or abilities and starts to shine once you get Tier 2 boons to stack on top of these basic modifiers. The Tier 2s either give you a larger area of effect, or grab what I like to grab, which is Jolt. I'd really recommend you picking up Jolt. You pick up the boon called Static Discharge. Jolt is a DOT effect that also spreads the damage to nearby enemies, which will damage themselves on their next attack or just after 10 seconds. Zeus's legendary after this creates yet another lightning burst, which can bounce up to 5 more times between enemies. Lightning is one of the best room clear status effects in the game and holds up well against bosses at the same time. For a weapon pairing, if you have it, I'd look to attach it to the Adamant Rail. There's just something about having rapid-fire bullets that jump from enemy to enemy with Jolt status effect attached to it. Definitely fun times. Next up, we have the goddess who is trying to demonetize my channel, Aphrodite. The status effects and boons from her keepsakes on their own don't contribute to adding more DPS, but once you get to tier 2, you can have a nice boost on your ability to deal damage. Aphrodite primarily offers the ability to weaken enemies so that they do less damage to you. She also has the ability to charm enemies through her call boon. Charm, as it does in most games, makes the enemies fight for you for a short period of time. And if you want to go all in on Aphrodite, and by that I mean go all in with picking up her keepsakes that is, then you want to shoot for the legendary boon, which provides a chance to charm enemies who are weakened for up to 4 seconds. My recommendation though is to focus on Aphrodite's passive boons rather than taking up a primary boon slot. Dying Lament spreads weak to nearby enemies when an enemy dies, and Life Affirmation increases the benefit you get from max life or health recovery items and fountains. This last one is great if you can pick it up early in your run, because that'll give you the best chance to increase your max HP. Up next, grab your goblet of wine, let's talk about Dionysus. Now if you prefer to play games as more of a tanky build or a survival build for you Dead Cells fans, then you'd be right at home with Dionysus. His passive boons all provide some form of a health or recovery boost, providing a little more survivability when you're prone to taking damage. My recommendation is to actually use his attack and damage dealing capabilities, however. These are primarily focused around Hangover, which is basically the same as Poison in most games. Damage is every half second for 4 seconds and can stack up to 5 times. If you combine this with adding Festive Fog, which is an AoE effect impairing enemy movements who are caught in the fog, then you can unlock Dionysus' legendary boon Blackout, which provides a 100% damage increase to hungover enemies caught in that festive fog. Now while fun and kind of memey, this combination and specific build requires a bit more coordination than others, and it requires a little cooperation from enemies as well. They don't tend to stick around in one place very long and be both in the fog and have a hangover at the same time, but you know, it's there, it can be fun. If you have nothing on your dash ability when you pick up a Dionysus keepsake, the Drunken Dash boon is a nice pickup. It adds the hangover effect at the point you start your dash, poisoning enemies who are pursuing you. For a weapons pairing, I'd recommend this with the Stygian Blade, the Eternal Spear, or the Twin Fists. It's nice to add a little hangover to each of your attacks. Up next, let's talk about Artemis. Critical damage is built into the game, but by default nothing you do is going to crit. This is where Artemis comes in. You can get a pretty good crit percent chance by picking up some keepsakes from Artemis. Attack, special, and cast ability tier 1 boons give damage ups, or, well, accuracy improvements technically for your cast, as well as a chance of critical. If possible throughout your run, increase the rarity of any Artemis weapon boon, as that will increase the crit percent chance, providing you the best overall damage for your build. Additionally, Clean Kill is a nice tier 2 boon, which increases your crit damage when you do land that critical strike. Other than that, Artemis can improve your cast, but on its own, it just isn't as good in the build. Some of the passive cast abilities are nice paired with other boons, but not as a first take. Next, let's talk about Poseidon and specifically Knockback. Now, for anyone that's a fan of Dead Cells, Knockback behaves just like you would expect. Do base damage, push enemies away, and if they hit a barrier or a wall, they take additional damage. Now, it should be noted that pushing enemies into barriers or walls already does additional damage, but there are boons, like Typhoon's Fury for example, that will increase this damage caused by the knockback status. Another tier 2 pickup would be Razor Shots, which inflicts a status effect called Rupture to any knocked back foes. This does damage every 0.2 seconds for 3 seconds. Doing the calculations, depending upon the rarity, this in total can deal anywhere from 75 to 187.5 points of damage to an enemy per knockback. Now if you pick up Poseidon's keepsake early, I'd grab the boon for your dash or your cast. This can provide you with some breathing room during a swarm. Probably the best use of Poseidon though comes from his call boon, Poseidon's Aid. This gives you damage as you ram into enemies and makes you invulnerable as well during the duration of the ability. Up next, we've got Athena. Now these keepsakes are all about helping to provide damage resistance or even reflecting damage back at enemies. Bronze skin and sure footing provide damage reduction, but grabbing a boon for any of the main attacks or abilities gives a reflect ability on that attack. My best recommendation is to grab the dash boon, Divine Dash. This effectively gives you iframes during a dash. Not full iframes, but it's as close as you can get. Other than that, the Deathless Stand can be a good tier 1 pickup, as that will replenish a Death Defy if you happen to have lost it earlier in your run. Brilliant Riposte is also a fun pickup, as that increases the damage on any reflected attacks, which that also will then unlock the ability to get Athena's legendary boon Divine Protection, which provides a shield on a 20-second cooldown. In the end though, you definitely want something that has the reflect capabilities. If not, you're all but guaranteed to be begging the RNG gods to give you a swarm of witches later on in your run. And last but certainly not least, let's take a look at what Hermes can do for us. Now Hermes is very situational. All of his abilities increase the speed of whatever that boon is applied to. A notable pickup that I like to see from Hermes is Quick Favor. This causes the call meter to auto-charge. But other than that, Hermes boons are very situational and can be either worthless or very powerful depending upon the rest of your build. Nothing really to note here other than to recommend taking him later in your run rather than early. Still not a god to sleep on, as increasing attack speed can be amazing on the right build, but something that due to the situational nature, you want to use that as a cap to your build rather than a foundation of your build. So that's going to about do it for the beginner's guide to boons. I'm going to be covering more Hades in upcoming videos, including the top 6 builds and tutorial guides, so make sure you're subscribed so that you can see when these new videos are available. And if you're still watching, thank you for being here. Let me know what you found useful. Until the next video, thank you for watching and take care.